Hi, this is Jacob from Starleaf Labs, your neighborhood-friendly developer. I'm going to try to bring some updates to you guys via video from now on, as it's a lot easier to explain stuff that's going on rather than, delve out screenshots and try to give you some comparisons. It's just a lot easier to show you live. So let's get to it. The first thing that I want to talk about is we're going to go away from the weekly update and move to a more bi-weekly update, as that's there's less content to really show you every week, and it's better to bring you more substance to an update than to kind of fluff it up or talk a little bit longer about something that's less relevant. So we just want to give you a little preface that that's going to change a little bit, but other than that, we'll get right into the nitty-gritty of what's been going on with 1.3. The key component to 1.3 has really been performance. There's been a lot of requests about being able to modify some of these voxels at large volumes, and when I initially implemented it, I had intended that Voxel Forge was going to be much more for smaller objects, but the more I started using it locally to build demos and give you some good examples of what you can do with it, I also started to realize that the performance was pretty lackluster when it came to larger objects. And mostly you can see over here in the parts section, you can actually see when you click on each part, it'll tell you how many voxels are in each area. And I've added a couple of things to 1.3, a little bit more detail, little less little less noise for the name of your object, some basic information that could be useful to you down the road, how many vertices in total, triangles, how big the serialized file may come out to be. Now these aren't exact numbers, but they're fairly close. How much potential memory could this one object take, and so again, they're not exact values. Don't use them as like the standard, but use them as a general guideline for what you're looking for. So the biggest thing was when you're dealing with an object that had a lot of voxels. For example, this object here, the castle wall segment, is actually the lower half or the lower piece of the actual wall here, and that has roughly 3,000 voxels. Now, when you broke around originally 500 voxels or so, it started to slow down and you could start to see some problems with it. So what I've done is I've improved the performance by reducing the size of each voxel and how much actually gets saved. And you can see immediately when I just delete these voxels, how rapidly it has removed just those voxels. It's a great way to explain what's going on. I'll undo what I did so it doesn't take up a lot. Undo is still a little slow, and that's simply because the serialization system in Unity is not the best in the world. It does a pretty good job, but because I'm using voxel data here, it stores all the information here in this voxel data script, which is just a mono behavior. And that gets naturally serialized to whatever this scene actually serializes as. So to move on, I'll show a quick example of adding a couple of voxels and correcting some of the placement of my parapets here. So I'll just pick this up. I will change to my paint voxel, and I will actually use the control key to pull the paint color that I want. I also could use my color palette if I want, but I find usually just picking out my color from what I'm trying to do is easiest. I will quickly create a couple more. And see, this is one of the things that you'll find yourself doing quite a bit unless you're very attentive, which is adding voxels to something that you didn't want to add them to. So the castle wall segment is not what I was looking for. So I'm going to undo the last couple of changes. Hopefully that will give me back what I want. There we go. Now we will select the upper wall with the opening, which is the one I'm currently working on. We will add our voxels. And then I will take those same voxels for this side. Now I will select them. I'm going to move this out of the way. Or I should say I'm going to move it down one. The selection tools are very useful for doing quick operations like this. Just being able to slide things away. There we go. And I always do this just out of habit because of the way I wrote it. I always use the no tool, which all those tools should actually just merge automatically, but sometimes, you know, I'm just a little worried that it doesn't work exactly as you kind of hope. So if you ever notice any weird oddities when you're selecting away from a selected voxel object, just use the no tool and it will default everything. It will merge everything back into the appropriate layers and you should be all set. Alright, I'm going to paint this, use the control key to grab my color. I'm going to repaint that voxel right there, and there we go. Now everything is much more lined up, looks much more even. And you can see very quickly that the performance is much better when dealing with larger objects. Originally, this wall was actually hollow from this point. I'll actually use the selection tool to show it. From about this point all the way through, it was completely hollow all the way to the other end. And the problem with that was that if you're dealing with real-time rendering, you get into objects missing, you know, voxels being missing behind them. So that's why I started to really work on this performance issue, so that way when you're doing real-time rendering, you actually have a volume of voxels and not just limited to a specific set. And you get rid of that fake look when you're actually just building a shell of something. So with that leads me into real-time rendering. Now, the real-time rendering has been another piece that I've been trying to build as an example of how well the voxel data actually works. And what I'll do is I'll actually run this. It actually takes a couple of seconds. This is kind of the beta version of this. So one of the things I am also working on before I want 1.3 to go out the door is that you will have the loading here will be much better, and it shouldn't need to be doing this kind of jittery motion because it's actually trying to load all the voxel data. And what I'll be getting into is that the voxel data will actually be stored via JSON file so that you can save it externally. You can move it around, you can load it to any real-time renderer. Right now it just uses a literal copy of this voxel data object, and it passes this around, and it's kind of sloppy and messy, but it'll get better, and you'll eventually just pick up a real-time renderer, and you'll actually be able to see very quickly how these work. So if I go back to the scene real quick and I actually select my barrel here, I actually have this new voxel data renderer behavior, which actually uses this voxel data renderer data script, which is how it actually loads its data. It says, you know, here's my original object, which this will be replaced with a JSON file. It will load all this information properly. The voxel data will show what the local version of this is. Here's some various settings that will be, a lot of this stuff will probably be simplified and removed since you guys won't want to see this. But the idea is that when you're dealing with real-time rendering, you'll be able to do something as simple as this. And this is a simple destroy script that I added, where you can actually just crumble your voxels right on the spot. And the idea behind that was just that I wanted to be able to remove these objects pretty quickly and have a really decent effect to do that. Now, right now it uses just cubes with actual physics. So it's a little slow when it deals with a huge amount of these because they're actually cubes. It can either remain that way, or one of my plans is to actually put in some sort of particle effect that does the same thing, so that it gives you roughly what you want, but otherwise you get into really slow problems. Now here's the real kind of nitty-gritty of being able to manipulate voxels on the fly. So, you know, if I click on these, it'll actually destroy these voxels. And you'll see I have, you know, kind of a little delay in there, and it has a nice little fade out effect. But then if I use the control key and this is just a script that I wrote to add on to this, where I can actually add voxels on the fly. And again, the performance isn't great, but that's something I'm working on, that before I put 1.3 out, this will hopefully be very quick, and you won't really notice any change, thus allowing any sort of real-time manipulation of voxels. And at the very least, you can actually rebuild your whole voxel mesh on the fly, which is a really handy thing to do if you're trying to manipulate this. Well, that's it for this week's update. I hope you enjoyed it. If you guys have any suggestions or questions, feel free to email us at vfsupport@starleaflabs.com. Thanks for your time. Take care.